Welcome, and thank you for joining us today. Before we kick off, I'd like to begin today by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet and pay our respects to their elders, past and present. I extend that respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples here today. Just a reminder that we are recording this session. The recording will be sent out to you and everyone who registered. Please note that any information that you provide will be managed in accordance with our privacy policy. You can find the link of our privacy policy in the chat. If you have any questions, please drop them in the chat box and we will leave about 10 minutes or so at the end of the session to go through them. We're all professionals here. If you see a question that resonates with you, please feel free to answer. Engage positively. We want to keep this a safe space to share knowledge and ideas. If you've been here before, you know that we give away a free coaching session with Support Coordination Academy. The winner will be drawn at the end of the session, so make sure you stay right to the end. Mary from Support Coordination Academy is facilitating our session today and we'll be exploring the important topic of safeguarding and your pivotal role as a support coordinator. Now, before I hand over to Mary, our facilitator for the day, I'd like to invite Kate Martin. Kate is Endeavour Foundation's Head of Practice, Quality and Impact. Kate will touch on our own approach to client safeguarding. Kate?
Thank you. Hello, everybody. In preparing for this intro, I was reflecting on my own career, and I actually started as a support worker, a disability support worker. And over the years, I did disability support work in Queensland, Victoria, and Tasmania. I also worked for a period of time at Kew Cottages. So if for people who've been around in the sector for a while, you'll remember it was a very large institution that no longer operates, but it's interesting to reflect over the time that I've been involved in disability services, at the changes that have been made to ensure the safety of people that we support. I also thought I pulled together what I've called, I just made it up, the 3 pillars of safeguarding. So I'm not going to go through all of that, but you'll, when you listen to Mary's presentation, you'll see that she certainly touches on a range of areas that move from legislative and regulatory frameworks to individual self-advocacy for people with a disability. All of those areas play a really important part in keeping people safe and in supporting people to keep themselves safe. So safeguarding is the protection of a person's health, well-being and human rights. It enables them to live free from harm, abuse and neglect. It is an integral part of providing high-quality care and support. Safeguarding children, young people and adults in our services is the responsibility of all of us. They are the actions designed to protect the rights of people to be safe from the risk of harm, from abuse and neglect, while maximising their choice and control over their own lives. The Endeavour Foundation recognises and understands that people with a disability face increased risks of harm, and Endeavour is committed to maintaining, sorry, I'm getting all of these alerts, it's a bit distracting. So we remain committed to maintaining a client safeguarding incident management process that focuses on the effective management and resolution of incidents and the application of harm and prevention strategies. Endeavour Foundation takes its responsibility to provide high quality support and services really seriously. You'll see in my pillars, we have a zero tolerance approach to VANE in our organisation, and we make that very, very clear. We use our systems and supporting structures and processes to examine every client incident and to ensure a person-centred approach to incident management. But also beyond that, what we actually want to create and what's part of our strategic plan is to create a culture where people feel safe to be able to report any concerns. Underpinning our approach is the recognition of the fundamental human rights of people with a disability. Endeavour Foundation will always support and uphold the human rights of all those involved with our organisation. And safeguarding is everyone's business. I think the final thing that I just wanted to say is that we not only try to encourage a culture internally where people feel safe to be able to raise concerns, but given the importance of the role of a support coordinator, we would also like to really highlight that if you ever have any concerns, that you would also feel safe to raise them with the Endeavour Foundation. So thank you. And like the rest of you, I really look forward to Mary's presentation.
Great. Thank you, Kate. I really appreciate it. So, okay, so we're going to move on to safeguarding. What is your role as a support coordinator? Online learning session for support coordinators. Okay. So as Helena says, please put any questions that you have or statements or anything that you want to have in the chat. And if anyone, if anyone poses a question and you've got that knowledge and experience, please feel free to answer that. Some really positive sharing that knowledge and skills would be amazing, because we're all learning. Okay, so let's make a start. So I'm going to kind of touch on what Kate, kind of following on from what Kate's really been talking about. So there's actually a link on here, and my understanding is that Endeavour will, of course, they're recording this session, but they'll also be sending out the PowerPoint slides. So there's a link on here where I've kind of got my information from, just so that you can go there and get more in-depth information. So going to start with the NDIS context around safeguarding. So as Kate says, they're actions designed to protect the rights of people to be safe from the risk of harm, abuse and neglect, while maximising the choice and control that participants have over their life. So choice and control is a very strong value, and it's something that support coordinators work towards all the time, around building capacity around that to have true choice and control. So that the NDIS, when they talk about these safeguards, they refer to informal and informal safeguards. So formal safeguards are those rules and actions that organisations take because they have a formal responsibility for the safety of the participants that they're supporting. Yeah. So these organisations, across a range of organisations. So they're things like the NDIS, Quality and Safeguard Commission, all the service providers, registered service providers. We're talking about, support coordinators. So within everybody's role, it's about coming back and understanding how we, within our own roles, actually need to abide by this, implement this safeguarding aspect to our role. So when we look at these rules and actions, they're things like, some obvious things like the NDIS Code of Conduct, the NDIS provider registration and the practice standards. And we know from the NDIS review that these are being reviewed and upgraded at the moment, which is great. So the complaints and incident reporting systems and procedures. And Kate referred to their policies and procedures and systems around quality management and what that looks like. There's also things like service providers provide worker training around quality and systems and safeguarding. There's also government funded programs around advocacy programs. And of course, support coordination. It's a safeguard. The NDIS seat is an intermediary between the NDIS and the participants, but it's also a safeguard to support participants. So there's also laws and things like disabilities, discrimination and consumer protection laws. And there's also things around like a guardianship for people who can't support themselves around that safeguarding role. So they're kind of more formal arrangements. We also have a look at some informal, or sometimes we call them natural safeguards. So these are the actions and features that are part of people's day-to-day lives that support participants to live safely. So these include things like actions that people with disability, so actions that help people with disability to make like informed decisions. So maybe providing accessible information, linking them with a formal advocacy service, or sharing information with that support network to help them build confidence in their skills around it. Having a trusted network of people to support. So that could be family, friends, connections in the community who look out for the person with a disability and help them to advocate for themselves. They also talk about paid advisors. So this is where the NDIS comes in, and just really acknowledging that those paid advisors are also, through the NDIS, are also provide that safeguarding role. So of course, support coordinators, when you talk about allied health therapists, if they're working with a participant and they notice there's a deterioration in their health or there's a concern, they raise those concerns. So support workers, so it's about who have that direct support and see that person on a regular basis. So let's have a look at, okay, here we go. Okay, so Renee's actually saying she doesn't have any sound. Renee, I would actually try logging out and logging back in again and seeing if that works. Okay, so let's have a look at support coordination in the safeguarding role. So how do support coordinators incorporate this principle of safeguarding into their role? So support coordinators have a professional responsibility to ensure they themselves and other providers deliver safe and quality supports to participants that they support, that they're linked in and connected with. So the NDIS Quality and Safeguard Commission refers to their safeguarding framework. They refer to developmental, preventive and corrective measures. So we're going to have a look at those and then we're going to have a look at how support coordinators implement these measures as part of their role. So, okay, sorry. Again, we're getting all these alerts coming up. Okay, so let's have a look at developmental measures. So these are measures that are used for strengthening the capability of participants and service providers to reduce the risk of harm and to promote quality services. So when you think about the support coordinator role, it has a capacity building focus. So as part of that capacity building focus, support coordinators use that focus to identify opportunities to build a participant's capacity to develop their confidence and skills so that they can self-advocate for themselves and they can make informed decisions. Okay, so that's just one example about developmental measures. Other developmental measures might be around linking in those formal advocates. It could be around, you know, supporting a participant to get education and specific training around informed decision making. There's lots of ways that that can happen. Okay, let's have a look at preventative measures. So these refer to proactively regulating providers and workers to reduce the risk of harm and promote quality services. So again, if you think about the support coordinator role, support coordinators, a strong focus of their safeguarding role is in relation to those service agreements. So support coordinators regulate providers by supporting a participant to negotiate how they want their supports and services to be delivered, which are then obviously documented and agreed in a service agreement. So a support coordinator also coordinates supports for a participant, so including that, so as part of that collaborative working relationship and coordinating those supports, they build that resilient network for a participant. So when working with a participant and you're unpacking their plan and understanding their goals and how they want to achieve those goals and what they actually mean to them, as part of that, linking in those supports and services, so whether they're funded services, community or mainstream services, it's about understanding where the gaps in that service delivery is for a person and building a resilient network of supports around that person, so that if a person goes into crisis or something changes in their life, they've got that support network to fall back on. And that includes informal supports and networks as well. Okay. Another way that a support coordinator implements those preventative safeguarding measures is by facilitating case review meetings, especially in highly complex situations when you might have, excuse me, a high number of stakeholders who all have their own agendas and priorities. Or you might be working with someone with really high and complex medical support needs, and so they might have a really big therapy team. Or there might be quite a complex situation where you've got a number of mainstream services involved. Excuse me. who you really need to get everybody onto the same page and really work together collaboratively. So it's about bringing everybody together. And so the preventative measure is making sure that everyone's on the same page, everyone's working towards the same goals and are working towards the same expected outcomes. Okay. Excuse me. Okay. Let's have a look at corrective measures. I'm not quite sure where the throats come from. Okay. This refers to problem-solving issues, enabling improvements, and avoiding the same issues occurring. So that's that whole professional practice that support coordinators use around that future planning. So we do a lot of planning around what are your current needs, where are the gaps, how do you want to achieve your goals, what do they mean to you? But also it's about, so what's next? What is your long-term plan? So what are those immediate goals, but also what are your aspirational goals? What are the things that you want to work towards? And really keeping an eye on those things so that we can have regular check-ins. Okay, so a way that a support coordinator facilitates these corrective safeguarding measures, again, what I'm saying, facilitating that person-centered planning with the person in their support network, and then being able to set a baseline of a participant's situation so that in the future, if something changes, you've got that baseline to measure against and you can see what's been achieved or where things have changed. Okay. Developing action plans. So really working with a participant to understand what it is and how they want to achieve their goals, putting an action plan in place so that you can track the progress, keep an eye on who's responsible for what. So what is an OT going to follow up on? What's the speech therapist going to follow up on? What are the family going to follow up on? How is the participant going to contribute? So an action plan really helps you to track that progress, but also see where things are falling behind, or if things aren't able to be completed, going back and being really being inquisitive and why isn't that working well and how can we do things differently. So it's really thinking about what are those corrective measures, those problem solving. Okay. Regular check-ins. So support coordinators need to be doing regular check-ins. So especially for those people who don't contact us all the time, or we don't see all the time, or they might be in that monitoring stage. So setting up those appointments and within your calendar to regularly at least check in with a phone call. How's it going? Is there anything we need to be following up on? Doing a very quick review. But this helps the support coordinator to really pick up earlier any patterns of behaviour or any changes in a person's situation. And it helps us to really identify and manage and react to these situations and put steps in place to mitigate and reduce the impact on a participant going forward. Also using risk assessments and risk management plans to document the type of risk and the strategies that are in place. Okay. It's also, with the risk, it's also about understanding who's responsible for that risk. So if the risk is, say, for example, the risk was in relation to a person who was residing within a supported independent living environment. So how is everybody working together to support that person for the support workers to understand that person's support needs? Do we need additional OT assessments? Do we need additional supports around that? So working together as a team and really within that risk assessment, really identifying who's taking responsibility for managing the risk. Okay, so combined, these actions, all of these actions combined, taken by a support coordinator, work together to promote the safety of participants and help to ensure that a participant is able to exercise their rights and have choice and control over their supports and services. Okay, just having a look at your notes at the same time. Okay, let's keep going. I'll be going through all the content and then we'll come back to the chat afterwards. So again, if someone is making comments on the chat, feel free to add to those comments, especially if you've got some really good strategies or anything of value that you can add. That would be fantastic. Okay, let's have a look at critical incident reporting. So I'm going to look at two things, critical incident reporting and code of conduct. So these are the two of the main things that relate to support coordinators that I just want to touch on. And they're often the two things that are through our coaching and through our training that we often get questions about because people need a bit more clarity around it, I suppose. Okay, so again, there's a link there. So the NDIS Quality and Safeguard Commission obviously have a lot of resources on their website for providers to access. And I think there's even information there for participants to access as well. So when looking at critical incident reporting, we're going to focus on the current NDIS environment where support coordinators are dealing with both registered and unregistered providers. Okay, so again, with the review that's happening around registration of providers and safeguarding and quality services with the Quality and Safeguard Commission and the review that's happening around that at the moment, you know, this context might change, but at the moment, this is what it looks like. So the Act and the NDIS Incident Management and Reportable Incident Rules 2018, there you go, I had to say that, only require registered providers to have an incident management system in place to ensure they have an adequate system to respond to, notify, and investigate reportable incidents. So Kate referred to their incident reporting structure before, yeah? Okay, so for support coordinators, it's best practice when dealing with unregistered providers, especially if they're providing supports to a participant who may be at risk of harm, that support coordinators have a discussion with that provider to really understand their skills and experience, and that if there are any potential risks, that they have that ability and that they're the right person to safely manage any potential situation. Okay. So it's like whether they're registered or unregistered providers, I always have these conversations. So if I'm working with a participant who is really highly complex, especially when I'm doing specialist support coordination, I'm always having those discussions with providers. So really talking about what are your skills, what are your experience, you know, are you able to manage these situations safely? So really just putting the additional safeguards in place. Okay. So reportable incidents include obviously incidents that are confirmed to have occurred, as well as allegations of incidents that are occurring. So I'm not going to go through what the reportable incidents are because most of you should know what they are and you can get those off the Quality and Safeguard Commission. What I want to kind of focus on is really the process. So a registered provider is required to notify the Commission of a reportable incident when an incident has happened in connection with. And this is the main thing that people have a lot of trouble in getting their heads around. So when we talk about in connection with, what it covers is if someone has observed or been involved in an incident that has occurred through the provision of supports or services. So if a support worker observes you know, something happening with a participant that meets the criteria around critical incident reporting, and it's happened during the provision of supports or service. It also is relevant in connection with, is also relevant to arising out of provision, alteration or withdrawal of a support or service. So if an incident has occurred because a service has been withdrawn, or say someone has provided a service, say for example, something might have happened, I'll give you an example, okay. Say an OT was working with a participant with an intellectual disability around some life skills, and then after that support that they provided them and they teach us some life skills, and it might have been about using some equipment, afterwards they might have tried to use that equipment and they might have harmed themselves. That's just an example of arising out of support or services being provided. So it's basically saying someone has provided a support, and then due to that support being provided, afterwards an event has occurred. Okay? Okay, so again, how does this relate back to a support coordinator role? So it's important for a support coordinator to, again, build that collaborative working relationship with the participant support network, because the benefit of building that relationship and taking the time to build those networks and connections is that when an event occurs, if something happens which requires a critical incident, or, you know, especially if it's an unregistered provider, building those connections and networks, it means that they are more likely to contact you to say, hey, I'm a bit concerned about this. I heard this happening, or I saw this happening the other day. So it really helps you keep within that circle, because people believe you and trust you to be able to come to you and provide you with that information. It's about getting that information so that you can act on it, as opposed to, if you're not keeping up with your participants, if you're not doing those regular check-ins, you're putting those safeguards in place, it means you're not really on top of or understanding that person's situation or context. And you're not able to be proactive in the way that you manage those situations. Okay. Because a support coordinator in these situations has a responsibility, obviously, to act on the information provided and put effective strategies in place. It's also about, if you get the information, then sharing that with that support network, bringing them together, possibly in a case review meeting or a meeting together, so that everyone can go, what happened? How did it happen? What can we do differently? How can we support the person to be safe? How can we support the person to access their rights? So another thing that support coordinators do, which I talk to support coordinators around best practice, is to always ask for a copy of a critical incident report, especially if it's a registered provider, and if it's an unregistered provider, getting them to document it in writing and sending it through to you. Or they might even have developed their own critical incident report. I know I work with a number of organisations who are unregistered providers, and they actually create their own critical incident reporting process. And then, because it's really good evidence, especially if you are evidence to support your risk assessments and the strategies and the supports that you are recommending, especially if you're needing to go for a change of situation. So attaching your risk assessment, the critical incident reports, it just validates the recommend and provides evidence around the supports that you're requesting. Okay, hopefully that's making sense. Yeah. Okay. So just to clarify, someone is going, raising incident reports with the Commission is difficult as a SC, as I'm the third party with only limited information. Okay, so just to be clear, it's not a support coordinator's responsibility to raise a critical incident report. If they weren't the person providing the support, observing part of the situation, they were there when that critical incident, or they provided the support, and due to that support being provided, that's when the incident occurred. So if you are support coordinators and you've got providers, you've become aware of a critical incident, our responsibility is to educate providers, service providers, and say, these are your responsibility in relation to critical incident reporting. You are required under the Commission to provide a critical incident report. And if they're coming back to you and saying, no, you just do it, no, we don't have time for that, or we don't know what to do, then as a support coordinator, I've supported the participant to put a complaint in. And that has started a process around the Quality and Safeguard Commission, investigating that around not their registration requirements around critical incident reporting. Okay, that's just trying to respond to that question. Okay, the crazy backlog here. Let's have a look at Code of Conduct. Okay. So Code of Conduct, again, there's a link there. Most of you should be aware of the Code of Conduct, and if you're not, you need to be getting onto the NDIS Quality and Safeguard Commission, downloading it and understanding what the conditions are, what the rules are around Code of Conduct. Okay. So NDIS, again, Quality and Safeguard Commission recognise that all people with a right have the right to live free from abuse, neglect, or exploitation and violence. As such, all providers, whether registered or unregistered, are bound by the NDIS Code of Conduct. So what that means is, it doesn't matter whether someone's registered or unregistered. If they are utilising NDIS funds, then they are bound by the NDIS Code of Conduct. Okay. So the NDIS Code of Conduct is obviously, the aim of that is to promote safety and ethical service delivery by all providers and their workers to participants that they're supporting. So the Criteria are things like acting with respect for individual rights to freedom of expression, self-determination and decision-making, taking steps to raise and act on concerns about matters that might have a unreasonable impact. So it's around the criteria around the code of conduct, but it's all around the actions that people need to be taking. So how does this apply to the support coordinator role? So of course, a support coordinator has a responsibility to understand what each of the elements of the NDIS Code of Conduct are, so that in their day-to-day interactions with the participant, they can proactively take steps to build the capacity of a participant to understand their rights, to be free from harm, which also includes experiencing unacceptable, inappropriate, or unethical practices. So these are relevant to things that I hear from support coordinators on a daily basis. They talk to me about service providers that they're dealing with. They're talking to me about other support coordinators that they've come in contact with, unacceptable, inappropriate, or unethical practices. So these are things that all support coordinators need to be across. So let's have a look at some examples of how support coordinators incorporate the NDIS Code of Conduct principles into their daily interactions with participants. Okay. So let's have a look. So this is an example. So say when you're supporting a participant to engage with providers who are accessing NDIS funds to provide supports or services. So whether the provider is registered or unregistered, they obviously have a responsibility. So support coordinator has a responsibility to make sure that they are aware of their responsibilities under the Code of Conduct. So registered providers are already bound by the registration process. Unregistered providers may not be aware of the Code of Conduct. So making them aware of what their responsibilities are. This could be easy as sharing the information in an email with a link to the Commission website. It could be supporting a participant to add a paragraph to a service agreement around the Code of Conduct and their responsibilities. It could be as easy as downloading resources and sending them through to a provider, or especially if they're new to the disability sector. Especially if we're getting providers that are coming in that are coming out into the sector and don't really have understanding of disability. An example might be, another example might be, say you're meeting with a participant and they express concerns around support workers' abusive behaviour, or the participant themselves might not have insight into the support workers' behaviours and that they are abusive or unethical. And I've heard this example quite a few times. So depending on the situation, you might take action to ensure the participant is aware of their rights and is linked in with the appropriate support to manage the situation, or to gain insight and develop the participant's skills. You could link them in with an advocate or a psychologist or someone who would help them to understand and get insight around how that is abusive or unethical, so that they can actually make informed decisions. Okay, so the other thing, I'm going to move on. So they're just two examples, trying to give you a bit of an example around the Code of Conduct. Okay. I know that you will have lots and lots and lots of other examples. So thinking about the participants that you're working with, when you hear this information, thinking about how are you going to react? How are you going to put strategies in place? What actions are you going to take? Okay. So I'm not sure if everybody is aware of this, but the NDIS Code of Conduct was recently updated to include conditions around price differentiation as a form of sharp practice. Okay, so this includes things like participants being charged a higher price for the same product compared to other people who do not have access to NDIS funding. So we see that happening all the time. So we are supporting participants to access therapists or assistive technology, and when we're getting quotes, we're getting these really high prices, but if someone contacts them and they're not part of the NDIS, it's a different price. So the NDIS Code of Conduct has been updated around this. Providing or claiming funds for services that are contrary to the intention of the NDIS funding approved on a participant's plan. Yeah. So you would have examples of this all the time. Providers claiming for supports that they haven't necessarily provided, or they're supports that aren't really relevant or are contrary to what the intention of the supports are or funding that's provided on the participant's plan. This could also include sharp practices as in charging for supports ahead, like charging a monthly rate as opposed to only charging for services that have been provided. Another sharp practice that they refer to is offering incentives for a participant to engage services when the support has no relevance to the NDIS plan. Yeah. So again, some of these practices clearly are conflicts of interest. Okay. So as well as conditions around when a provider, so there's also conditions around when a provider advertises for the sale of their business. So this is ensuring that they don't falsely claim that participants in the NDIS plan are a guaranteed source of income, or that the participants and their plans will transfer with the business as part of the sale. Yeah. Okay. So really good things to be aware of. Okay. So I provided you with just 2 NDIS Quality and Safeguard Commission policies that support coordinators need to be aware of in relation to safeguarding role. So again, it comes back to support coordinator role being proactive and implementing those, building that resilient network of supports around a person to ensure some of those safeguards are in place. Okay, so I'm going to come back to okay. Sorry, price differentiation. Sorry, I didn't go through to that slide. Okay. So again, it's coming back to the professional responsibility to be proactive in implementing those informal and formal safeguards. Okay, so I'm going to go to Q&A and I've got 40 minutes. Okay, we've got quite a bit of time left, which is great. Okay. Okay, do we have Helena there? Yeah, we do. Okay. Just going to go through the chat. I wanted to ask, recently the NDIS has been pushing back on support coordination and referring participants back to LACs. How does this affect safeguarding? Really good question, Rebecca. I think you would need to understand the context for that person, and you would need to understand from the NDIS and the LACs about how they intend on providing support to that person. The intention of the NDIS has always been through the participant pathway, is that once a participant gets their plan approved and they get funding allocated on their plan, that they get support through that implementation process. So, and that's around that safeguarding. So the safeguarding would be that either an LAC, a support coordinator, or early childhood early intervention service would provide support around that implementation. So I would be going back to you, Rebecca, and really having a look at what are the supports that that person requires. Is it a higher level of support that that person requires more than the LAC can provide, and having those discussions with the LACs or the NDIS if it's possible to do that, and if not, then really gathering evidence around the level of safeguarding that that person needs. Okay, without really understanding the situation, it's about the best I can provide. Okay. Yeah, okay. And Loz has added to that, is there enough support coordination hours built into plans to effectively implement these safeguard measures and review? Yeah, absolutely. And it's a really, really good point. So if you're working with a participant and they have minimal hours, or you're going through those crisis situations, really stepping back and making an assessment around, or gathering evidence around the level of safeguarding that this person requires. Because safeguarding, if there's not enough safeguarding supports and networks or services around that person, then that adds to the level of risk. So gathering that evidence around risk for that person to elevate that level of risk and being able to support those recommendations for support coordination hours. Okay. Yeah. So advocacy organisations usually lack capacity to take on new clients. Yep, We're seeing that all the time at the moment. However, that's a very strong recommendation in the NDIS review. And we're already starting to see those foundational supports and the uptake of the government with those foundational supports, the discussions that are already happening around those. And part of that is recommendations around additional funding for advocacy services, which would be amazing, as along with all those other foundational supports. Okay. We're currently supporting I'm assuming a self-managing complex 3 participant on a self-managing plan. Independent non-registered support nurse. Okay. Loz, I'm happy to talk to you. That's a very complex situation. Yep. Look, safeguarding doesn't have to be something that's really, really, really complex. Safeguarding can be something that is really easy, and it's about stepping back and go, what are my professional responsibilities and how do I put safeguarding measures in place? It's about keeping in the back of your mind that safeguarding is part of your professional responsibility. So it's not just about saying, well, I don't have enough hours and when I don't have enough time to do this. So it's about going, what are my priorities and what are the things that I need to focus on? So if I have limited hours, how can I prioritize the use of those hours to ensure that we've got some minimal safeguards in place to enable other actions to happen? And it's not just about support coordinators putting safeguards in place. It's about what I was talking about earlier, is about who is responsible for managing that risk. So when you are working with a participant who has complex support needs, and they often have a number of mainstream or therapists or funded providers or community other providers in place, stakeholders, it's about bringing them all together and going, right, so we know that these are issues. Who's going to take responsibility for what? So how are the therapists going to put safeguards in place? How are the support and independent living providers going to put safeguards in place? What are you doing as a support coordinator to put safeguards in place? So it's about saying it's not a support coordinator's role to do all this safeguarding. It's about stepping back and understanding that it's part of your professional responsibility to instigate it and bring stakeholders and support networks together and really have that conversation saying we do this as a collective, as a group. We work collaboratively and we support each other to support this participant to be safe. Okay. In relation to the support coordinator role expanding, yep, it expands all the time, and I find that the NDIA are constantly pushing back on the support coordinators taking up more and more responsibility. But I suppose, again, it's coming back to what is your professional responsibility? What is the information, the evidence that you need to gather? Who's providing that information? Who's helping you to manage that risk? And really just feeding that information back to the NDIS. And yes, I know that there's a lot of backlog at the moment, but again, it's around how can you be proactive? How can you put systems and structures in place to ensure that you're not leaving it until your hours are running out, that you're being proactive and putting systems and structures in place to ensure those safeguards, to put supports and services around that person, to at least keep them in a safe place to a point in time, and then gathering that evidence and feeding that information back, and then escalating it, having proactive strategies in place to escalate those situations. If a service provider asks for extra funding to mitigate the risk to a client and the delegate declines it, is it the NDIS's responsibility to manage the risk? That's a very broad statement. What I would be coming back to is if the service provider is asking for additional support because they have concerns around being able to keep a participant safe, and the NDIA or the delegate is declining those supports, then I would be coming back and having that conversation with the NDIA, with advocates, with the service provider, really looking at, well, what evidence was provided? How did that provide clear evidence around the functional impact for that person, how that relates to risk and the level of safeguards that are required in place, and how does that relate to the supports that are required? So I would be going back and reviewing that situation and really looking at it and unpacking it and going back and providing more evidence, because just saying that well, they've declined it and the safeguards aren't in place. Again, it's coming back to, well, how do we be proactive around this? Okay. Yep, getting a lot of plans with SB level 2 hours. Okay. I suppose what I've done, here we go. Independent support workers have grown. Some participants only want independent support workers, and a lot do not have incident reports of their own. Often I've had to provide a template and explain how to fill it out. Participants refuse to have anyone else on their support team. Yep, absolutely, and that's their choice. But as a support coordinator, our responsibility is to go, okay, so let's talk this through. How are you going to, you know, and really talking to the participant around what does a quality service look like? What are the safeguards that you're going to have in place? What if your relationship breaks down? And really having those discussions. And I have a number of participants who have independent support workers, and we sit down as a group and we have those discussions and we go, so what are the structures we need to have in place? Who's going to support the participant to have a voice? How is that going to work? And sometimes we write them into a bit of a plan, or we link them in with, I link in the participant in with an advocate or a psychologist that they're working with, so they can have those conversations with a psychologist, build those independent skills to have those difficult conversations if they need to, but also providing templates. Absolutely. Another template that I provide is just a really clear number of questions for a support workers to give me regular updates on how things are progressing. And it's really just about what are the supports you're providing, you know, so what achievements have been made, what goals you're working towards, what's the progress, what achievements have been made, any challenges or barriers that you're experiencing, what strategies have you put in place, what are the things that you're working on next, like something really basic like that. And I get them to provide that on a regular basis, especially if I don't have a lot of interaction with the independent support worker, because that independent support worker is working directly with the participant. And it's part of the service agreement that we set up with the independent support workers. So again, these are all safeguarding strategies. Okay, we've got lots and lots and lots. Okay, so I'm going to do one more. Raising critical incident reports with the Commission is difficult. Yeah, kind of talked about that. Crazy backlog, absolutely. Okay, non-registered providers won't even provide a service agreement, let alone a risk assessment or an incident management. Okay. So I suppose what we teach at Support Coordination Academy is around best practice. So if I'm working with a participant and they're engaging non-registered providers, then I have a big conversation with them around, again, how are you going to manage that relationship? How will you know what quality service looks like? With the registered providers, you've got service agreements. Let's put some kind of agreement in place. And so I talk with my participants around building their capacity about having those conversations. And if they're self-managing their funding, still having those conversations. So what strategies can you use? How about we develop a template or put something in an email so that you're really clear about what the arrangement is and they're really clear about the arrangement. So how do we put a structure or a process and system in place so that if the support breaks down or something happens and you're not happy with it, you can come back to that agreement about what that support was going to look like. And with the participants that I'm supporting, 99% of the time, I can get them to put something in place, whether it's an email, whether it's a conversation that we've recorded and I've put in an email and I've sent it out to everybody. So it's about going, how do you set that relationship up at the beginning to provide some form of safeguard for that participant? Okay. So do NDIS service agreements not count as clients in the sale of a business? Absolutely not. A service agreement is not a contract. A service agreement is just that. It's a contract. It's just an agreement. So participants have choice and control. They can choose to take their funding wherever they like. So there's no guarantee that if a person sells their business, that participant will stay with that service. That's what the NDIS Code of Conduct is referring to. Okay, so we have lots and lots of other questions, and I'm sorry we haven't got to all the questions just yet. So what we will do is the Endeavour are going to download the chat and they're going to send it to me, and I will respond to those questions. So there any other questions that you have, put them in the chat now, and then I will respond to them via email to Endeavour. Endeavour are going to send out a link to the videos, recording the PowerPoint slides, and the chat responses. Is that right?
That's right, Mary. Thank you very much.
Fantastic.
Thank you, everyone. As Mary said, we'll go through all the unanswered questions and provide a response where we can. So you should receive this and other resources early next week into the email that you registered with. Now, for the lucky door prize winner, Sarah Hipwell. I hope you're still online, Sarah. You will receive an email from Claudette with further details on how you can redeem your prize for today. Please feel free to complete our feedback form. You can find the link in the chat box now. It will help inform us for future sessions to make sure that our topics are relevant to your needs and your questions. So it is essential that we get that feedback from you. May's webinar topic, I'm really excited to let you all know that it will be empowering change, strategies for capacity building and support coordination. You'll receive the registration link in the inbox very soon, and we really hope to see you back next month for that session as well. So thank you very much for everyone that attended. We hope that you received lots and lots of information today. Thank you, Mary, also for facilitating the session.
Oh, you're welcome, guys. And I'm loving the clapping hands and the thumbs and the love hearts. Just fantastic. Thank you so much, everyone. We really, really appreciate it. Have a great day, and we'll catch you next month. And if anyone, sorry, just to follow up, if anyone wants to follow up, to have any more depth and conversations, feel free to email me and we can connect. Okay. Take care,
Thanks,
everybody.
Mary. Thanks, everyone.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to our Learning and Lifestyle Hub. This is where we make learning fun.
Hi, I'm Grace. I live independently with support when I need it. I live my life my way.
Hi, my name's Jeremy. My daughter's 3 years old. My daughter's proud that I come to work.
Hi, I'm Maddie and I work for the Endeavour Foundation. I come to work with a big smile on my face every day.
Love to work here because that's my new family.